I'm from the Graduate Employees Organization at UIUC. On behalf of the organizing of the many people that have put their hands, their love, and their intentions in this event, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks, Barbara, for recording, even though I didn't remind you to. Thank you so much. ¿Verdad? Los compañeros que nos están visitando, compañeras y compañeros en español y compañeros, bienvenidos a esta actividad. Estamos bien pompeados, estamos nerviosos, pero estamos bien alegres también de compartir esto con ustedes. I'm going to right now let my 3 amazing friends, extended family, and people that I've been building and doing a lot of work for many years to introduce themselves. And then we will start off our conversation today with a really cool video about the student assembly that allowed for the systemic strike to start. So el que quiere empezar de los Gabo y la Verónica, preséntense y continuamos.
Well, hello, my name is Gabriel Casal Nazario. I'm very excited to be here with you all so we can share our experience and we can construct a different world together across different boundaries. This student strike was a very important part of my life. I know it was a very important part of thousands of students' lives. So I'm very excited to share it with you, and yeah, that's it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Verónica Figueroa Huertas. I was part of the student movement since the beginning of my student life in the university. I'm also one of the students who is accused by the state as a consequence, or yes, as a consequence of the student strike of 2017. So thanks, Carla, for making this possible, and thanks everyone for being here today with us. And yes, same as Casal said, the student strike was a really important process for me, evidently. So I'm really excited to share all the reflections and thinkings about that with everyone. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Diaz Rivera. I was also in the student strike in 2017. I've been basically in the student movement since I started in the university. Thank you very much for the opportunity, taking the time to study and, discuss with us our experiences. We hope that it, can enrich you in some way. And yeah, and thanks for the donations. We've been receiving them. I'm also one of the students that is in a criminal process due to the university strike. So thanks a lot for that. And yeah.
Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and get started, or continue actually. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As many of you know, hopefully we will be able to do this presentation well with no technical difficulties. I am declaring that right now. We're going to start by sharing a very neat video that explains the initial process of the student, the student assembly that we participated in back in April 5, 2017. Hoping you enjoy it. It has English subtitles as well. We're going to do a quick sound check to see that we're going to listen to the video first and see and do a quick sound check. As also another super quick housekeeping item, hopefully the video will go through, but if you're able, and maybe turn down your cameras while we present it, so that way the bandwidth, we don't have any internet connections issues, we would highly appreciate that. I know it's not the best, but it's just so that the quality of the video can show. And yes, I'm going to play it now. Gabriel, Verónica, and Casal, please let me know if we're listening in it well. Okay, play.
Independientemente de lo que pase en esta asamblea, nosotros queremos realizar acciones concertadas en distintos lugares de la isla a la vez. La idea es que todos los viernes podamos hacer esto en los distintos lugares que tienen, ¿verdad?, que tienen culpa de la crisis y de la deuda. Si pueden anotar su nombre con su número de teléfono, porque lo más que usamos son los WhatsApp y los mensajes de texto. Voy a pasar la lista por ahí y se siguen apuntando. ¿Quién le interesa? Hay que hacer protestas en los bancos, hay que hacer protestas en los abogados que firmaron por la deuda, los CPA, toda esa gente es culpable.
¿Por qué otros bancos?
Porque estos bancos tuvieron que ver con la deuda del país ilegal. Por ejemplo, Santander, en comisiones nada más de emisión de deuda, se hizo 332 millones de dólares. Y Ricardo Rosselló y la Junta nos están diciendo, si ustedes no quieren que les recorten a educación, encuéntrenos dónde vamos a sacar los chavos. Pues la idea es que nosotros vayamos donde estos bancos, Santander, UBS, Citigroup, que cada uno de ellos hicieron más de 300 millones con la deuda, y le digamos, necesitamos que los chavos que se hicieron ilegalmente los depositen a educación, a salud, a vivienda, a transporte.
Supuestamente Ponce la quiere leer y demás. Estamos acordando que detrás de esa persona haya representación de todos los recintos. Ya se habló con 6, 7 recintos.
Que ya se cuadró con Ponce, están buscando vaqueo atrás de todos los recintos para que estén parados juntos. Me lo dijo Randiel, si quieres, si te encuentras con Randiel, pregúntale. Dame todas las que no hay que terminar.
De la enmienda que exige, ¿verdad?, la auditoría de la deuda. Cuestión de orden.
¿Ya la pasaron por aquí? Sí, ¿y firmaron? Ok, pues voy a coger entonces más para arriba a ver si... Y si nosotros no nos ponemos para nuestro número y empezar a crear proyectos de país distintos y no nos comunicamos con los diferentes sectores, pues vamos a dejarle el país en las manos a esta gente que va a seguir pidiéndonos que seamos bartender, que seamos meseros, que sigamos trabajando para Walmart, que sigamos trabajando para Walgreens.
Hola, mi nombre es Verónica, soy del movimiento estudiantil del recinto de Río Piedra. El pasado viernes el corillo de sociales de Río Piedra fue al Banco Santander y emplazó a la Junta Directiva de Santander a entregar documentos que contienen información sobre la deuda del país, y entendemos que esas son las acciones que hay que seguir tomando para llevar a cabo una auditoría ciudadana verdadera y se procese legalmente a los culpables. Estamos recogiendo contactos desde que empezó la asamblea y desde antes incluso, para poder establecer los vínculos y las comunicaciones que nos permitan coordinar que en Río Piedra vamos a trancar el expreso hoy y Humacao tranca la 30, por ejemplo. Una de las discusiones que hemos tenido es que la deuda se crea para subsanar los subsidios que el gobierno estuvo dando por un montón de décadas desde los 70 a las corporaciones que venían a Puerto Rico que no pagaban impuestos. Humacao está bien puesto. Yo creo que sí, yo les hablé allí. Yo creo que se jalan para acá.
Si se cogen bien los turnos y se ayuda a la gente,
Ponce. ¿Cuándo es? ¿Ahora? ¿Es ahora la moción? ¡Ponle a Río Piedra! ¡Hay un corillo ahí de distintos recintos! ¡Dale!
es que lo hagan, no es que se le diga.
Según van llegando, yo vine donde ella y me dijo que estaba puesto en Río Piedra. Ha tachado 4 turnos y ninguno en Río Piedra. No respetan la CEN, por eso es que entramos en el antagonismo, porque no respetan los procesos estudiantiles.
Hace 2 horas, en cuanto el pago de una deuda sin auditar se ponga por encima de los servicios esenciales y el bienestar del pueblo, intención principal de la Junta de Control Fiscal y el gobierno de Puerto Rico. Por cuanto la administración universitaria sea cómplice de las medidas de austeridad impulsadas por el gobierno y la Junta de Control Fiscal, por lo tanto, la Asamblea Nacional Estudiantil decreta una huelga sistémica indefinida. Comenzando mañana 6 de abril a la medianoche.
Es necesario que se contabilice cada voto. Los estudiantes, favor de estar en sus sillas para proceder a votar. Aquellos a favor de la moción, favor de levantar las manos en este momento. Adelante a procesar el comité de escrutinio el voto secreto de Calle. Gracias.
Wow, that was really something else. Thank you all for listening to that. Now we're going to continue with the presentation that we have for you today. Let me stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'm going to, give us just a sec here. Very good. So we're going to continue today's presentation with the following. I'm sharing my screen now. Okay, very good. I got emotional seeing that video. I mean, that student assembly was something else. Everyone that was there, we evidently enjoyed it, and it was something very important for us. So we're going to continue with a brief historical background of the Puerto Rico student movement, just so that you can have a broader idea of where does the student movement come from. I'm going to do that part. Then Veronica is going to talk to us a little bit more about the organization of the strike. Then Gabriel Casal is going to talk about the communication strategies of the strike. Later, Gaby Diaz is going to talk about the negotiation strategies and how did we build relations across different sectors. And then we're going to have a section with Andrea that is going to give us some moderated questions. And then we're going to open the forum for questions of everyone here in the meeting. We also want to highlight that the Puerto Rico student movement has been indirectly and directly related to the struggle for Puerto Rico's independence and different social justice causes around the world, around the world and around obviously Puerto Rico. And that is why it's not a coincidence, right? How the oversight board that we're going to talk about more in a few minutes, how the oversight board imposed by the colonial government of the United States, it's not a coincidence that they decided to meddle in and dismantle the university first in their austerity agenda that we have been seeing over the last 3 years. So moving on, as I mentioned, we're going to start us off from when the university was created. So the University of Puerto Rico is the only public higher education system in the archipelago of Puerto Rico. It was founded in 1903. And since the very beginning, we had a very strong militant student movement particularly in the Rio Piedras campus and then in the other 11 campuses and consequently as well. During particularly the 1930s and 1940s, obviously the university is not in isolation. And what was happening in Puerto Rico at the time was a strong, particularly predominantly nationalist pro-independence movement in the island in the struggle for independence. And the students were also involved and were part of then conversations in the university around how we would make the university a more autonomous structure, claiming more democratic participation opportunities. At that time, there was a strong influence of the government of Puerto Rico in what we would call today the Board of Trustees. And very importantly, very similar to what the United States did with Native Americans, that they imposed English as their language of instruction. In Puerto Rico, it happened the same, something very similar. And the students were claiming more participation, instruction mainly in Spanish, and more connections with the people from Latin America. And here you're seeing pictures of student assemblies. And this picture below is a protest around Gulag laws, which was la ley de Mordaza that was imposed in Puerto Rico to penalize and criminalize the independence movement in the archipelago of Puerto Rico. Then the 1960s, 1970s, we all know that the world was upside down. We had the Vietnam War, we had the pro-independence movements in different countries in Africa, La Revolución Cubana, the Cuban Revolution, and most importantly, the ROTC and the required military service. And the struggles, not only for the independence of Puerto Rico, but in the local university, struggles against being a student and also going to the military, right? Here you're seeing La Federación Universitaria Pro Independencia in a protest during these claims. Also seeing part of the things that students did at the time. There was actually a big protest in which El ROTC, which is this building over here, was set in fire. And two important or student leaders or student members at the time, we have Antonia Martinez Lagares, who was shot by Puerto Rican police back in 1970s. And we also have Jose Fefel Barona, which was a very important student leader at the time. He died directly as a consequence of the Vietnam War. And he also founded La Organización Continental Latinoamericana de Estudiantes, a continental and Latin American organization for students across Latin America and the Caribbean. Then in the 80s, we see an important shift. So it's not only a pro-independence struggle for a better university, it's also a fight against austerity with a more classist perspective, right? In 1981, students went into a strike. They striked before in 1948, also in the 70s, but in 1981, it was a direct strike against tuition increase. Correct me if I'm wrong, my friends, but it was a tuition increase from $5 US more or less to nearly 3 times that, $15, $20 per credit, with gradual increases every year. And in this particular movement, La Unión de Juventudes Socialista, which is a pro-socialist, pro-independence, revolutionary organization in Puerto Rico, was very active among many other organizations. And here you're seeing a picture of Roberto Alejandro to my left, and students running around and protesting the very big inference of the police at that time that entered the campus and severely punished students, and obviously the offensive of students as well. Now moving to the 2000s, now we're seeing students more concentrated against neoliberalism and against tuition increases, but also thinking about how can we make a university that it's public, it's accessible, but it's also of quality for all students, professors, and everyone on campus. In 2005, there was another student strike against a gradual increase, this time from $35 USD per credit to $45 USD, and then gradual increments every year. And then the two pictures that you're seeing here are from the 2010-2011 student strike. This wasn't, there were 2 different moments of this strike, both in 2010 and 2011. But this particular strike was against the privatization of campuses around the archipelago of Puerto Rico, against the elimination of tuition waivers for our student athletes, students that do performing arts, and other things that get tuition waivers from the university, and also against an imposition of an $800 quota that was a direct result from the bill La Ley 7 of Gobernador Fortuño that imposed that quota to stabilize the general funds or the finances of Puerto Rico after laying off over 30,000 public employees in Puerto Rico. We also want to highlight that compared to the unions here in the United States, the movement in Puerto Rico is pretty organic. So there's no official structure in addition to the Student Council in Puerto Rico, in the University of Puerto Rico. So all the strikes that you have seen so far are democratically voted in student assemblies, and then organically students organize and build on those demands as well. Almost wrapping up here, after the 2010 strike, we saw a little bit of decrease in student movement, and 2014 up until 2016 was the time for regrouping, right? To reorganize the student movement, particularly through 2 or 3 different coalitions. In 2014, el Frente Estudiantil por una Educación Pública Accesible y de Calidad. And then in 2015, Reunión Amplia, then we had el Colectivo Amplio Estudiantil de Lucha, el CAEL, which is this red logo to my right over here. And during those times, we were talking about how can we build a public accessible education, and again, continuing the fight against austerity, but also against patriarchy too, because we had a very vocal feminist movement also in Puerto Rico. During that time, 2014, 2015, and 2016, we had 3 consecutive walkouts of 3 to 4 days each. And as you can see in this logo over here, we're talking about how can we recover the University of Puerto Rico, retomar la UPR, make it for the students, by the students, led by the students and its community. And lastly, before Veronica talks about, this is one of before going into the 2017 strike, the student movement had actually proposed to do a strike in an assembly back in April 2016, but the students at the University of Puerto Rico said no. And as you can see here, we were demanding that the Treasury of Puerto Rico would pass the 9.6 percentage of their general fund. So 9.6% of Puerto Rico's general fund goes to the university. And in 2014, that law froze the current budget of the university. So we were demanding that all that money was passed to the university, eliminating the board of trustees, and to keep also taxing big corporations so that that money could go back to the university. Cerrar para abrir, cerrar para construir, very important slogan. And before the 2017 strike, in 2016, the government of the United States signed the Oversight Board, Promesa, La Junta de Control Fiscal, which is an oversight board that literally controls Puerto Rico's finances. And it controls Puerto Rico's finances so that Puerto Rico can pay up its nearly $72 billion debt, which has everything to do with Puerto Rico's colonial structure, because the US takes out nearly $40 to $50 billion every year from Puerto Rico, right? In corporations, Walmart, etc. And right after that bill was passed in 2016, summer of 2016, you have the creation of Se Acabaron las Promesas, a coalition that rearticulated the pro-independence, pro-austerity movement in Puerto Rico. The picture over here is of the protests in August 31st against an event that the Oversight Board was having to basically market this new law in Puerto Rico. Then in March 8th of 2017, we had a historical women's strike, which is the picture here to my right, where women paralyzed or stopped one of the most important expressways in Puerto Rico, and they also did an important protest where all the banks are located. Then the student strike passed, in which we were demanding these 3 demands here: a national debt audit, 0 budget cuts and 0 tuition increase, and university reform, right? The students since the early 1940s have been asking for more and more reforms in the university, and we have managed to accomplish many of these, but we wanted a reform that could guarantee no more increases in tuition and no more budget cuts in the university, and obviously no sanctions. The last thing I want to highlight here also is that one of the main successes of the strike was that we actually accomplished that for one full year, the university did not increase tuition, and that was a direct result from the strike. And before engaging into the strike, the reason that Gabriel, Casal, and Veronica, we know each other so well was because we decided to create a political organization called La Colectiva Independentista Radical, la CIR, this logo over here to my right, in order to do a more consistent work at the university, more militant work, and also a more ideologically focused work in favor of Puerto Rico's independence, socialism, and feminism in Puerto Rico. So that is all for now. I'm going to leave it now to Veronica so she can lead us through the organization of the strike. So Veronica, the floor is yours. I'm going to stop. Veronica, do you want me to stop sharing, right? Okay.
¿Me escuchan ahora? ¿Se ve?
Sí, se escucha y se ve.
Okay, super. So I'm going to be talking about the organizational aspects of the student movement and the strike of 2017. When Carla invited us to have these discussions to make this photo happen, we were like all over the place because talking about the student strike or any mass process is like overwhelming. So we decided to elaborate some questions around some of the most important aspects of the student strike, and the organizational ones are how were we organized before the strike, how were we organized during the strike, why did we organize ourselves that way, and how did the central structures communicate with themselves. And I'm going to be going really brief over these questions. And to begin, I want to note that it's really important that we keep in mind that every mass process or social process, as was the student strike of 2017, the organization of it is going to respond to its context. So we cannot compare the 2017 strike to the 2010 or to 2011 strikes, seen like in a box way. We need to contemplate the difference of the context. And in our context, as Carla was, going through all the years of the student movement history of the University of Puerto Rico, after the 2010 and 2011 strikes, the University of Puerto Rico student movement experienced like, I don't want to say like a bad moment. I don't know what's the words in English, but it wasn't the best position or moment in terms of political organizations and in the student space. So in my experience in the other conference, we had these like different spaces that we were trying every other year to like be more solid or more strong than the year before. And that's the reason, as Carla said, we decided to create the Colectiva Independentista Radical. I was also part of that political organization. And during the 2017 strike, one of the main challenges we faced was that we were like constructing the strike during the strike. We didn't have like this big plan structure of organization or communication. So it was like very challenging. And I would say that many people see that as, I don't know, ¿cómo se dice debilidad en inglés?
Weakness.
Yes, many people said that that was one of the main weakness of the strike, but after all of our conversations, I would say that maybe it was a weakness, but we did awesome things with that weakness. You know, we did like these big things with the poor organization that we got. And so going to the point, how did we organize ourselves? This I bring these examples of the base committees of the student movement. This was the 9 base committees of the 2017 strike. The 5 that are in the upper part of this slide were created in 2016, and some of these committees have names that in 2010 strike, you know, they were the same, like the CABA, which is the Corillo Activo en Bellas Artes. And this is, I don't know if you're going to understand that, but in the Rio Piedras campus, Carla, I don't remember if you explained that the University of Puerto Rico is, we got 11 campuses. Yes, so in the Rio Piedras campus, the student movement have like all these base committees because they respond to the faculty and also to the space of the campus. And for example, the clase, which is the first image in there, respond to the social and business faculties, which are separate, but they are physically next to each other. And when we are in a strike at the Rio Piedras campus, the people in charge of watching the gates are the nearest to that gate. So the student of sociales or business are the ones in charge to, you know, look out for the gates that are near to the faculty. And we got all these base committees, and as I was saying, some of them were created before this 2017 strike. Some of them were created during the 2017 strike, but it's really important that for me to explain that although the committees that were created on 2016, they were not doing necessary political work or organizing work according or, you know, thinking in a strike between 2016 and 2017. So when we started the strike, it was like, oh, we need to do work again, but it was really important for us to have those structure before the strike, you know, created, because it kind of, you know, help us to build like networks to communicate ourselves and also to put in action many of the ideas that we got. So I want to go to how all these committees communicate between them. We got La Coordinadora, which is like this structure that we adopt and adapt during the 2017 strike. And the idea of La Coordinadora was to make things easier for the students during the strike or around the strike. We also got this in the, I don't know if, Carla, if they got like a word para los paros. Paro y huelga para nosotros no es lo mismo.
Walkout. So
okay, so
strike of a couple of days. Maybe that's a good.
Yeah. So in 2016, we got these like little strike that you call walkout. And we got this structure in that walkout, and it was supposed to help us to communicate ourselves better. And the idea is like that all these committees were supposed to have meetings and, you know, like bring out the central ideas or proposal or themes of interest. I don't know, maybe El Hell, which is was the Humanistas en Lucha, the students from the humanities faculty. They wanted to do, I don't know, a performance around gender violence in Puerto Rico. So they like proposed that in the central structure, which was La Coordinadora. And other committees do the same around other teams, or maybe the same themes or ideas. And La Coordinadora was in charge of take that to the Pleno. And the Pleno is like this space where everyone participating in the strike, regardless if you were part of a base committee or not, have the access or the option to participate. And that was also the space where decisions were made. So I don't know if I'm explaining good, but that's the idea of La Coordinadora. We got the base committees, and we also got political organizations in the university. As Carla mentioned two of them, because she mentioned La Colectiva Independentista Radical, which was the one that we created. And she also mentioned the Unión de Juventudes Socialistas during her exposition. And we also got the Juventud Ostosiana, which is the student part or arm of a national organization here in Puerto Rico. So there were other groups in the student space at the university, but they were not the most strong doing the political or organizational work. So we got like a lot of committees, a lot of groups, like pulling their ideas and proposing or making proposal of manifestation and actions around the strike. And why did we got a lot of base committees in terms of these groups that I explained responded to the space and faculty in the Rio Piedras campus? Well, to communicate better and to also, like attract people and give people something to do. Because one thing that we love to say and always, that's the best way to do political work is to, if some people get to you, I want to join you, what can I do? Well, then you need to give those people something to do. The most minimal thing, like, we were going to collect contacts, well, help me collect contacts. So that's some, examples of what the base committees did. This is an example of a promo of Pleno. And we also got in the strike other types of committees, which were like work committees. We got the Comité Central de Comida, which was in charge of fed everybody in the strike. This is an example of a promotion, trying to collect food, ingredients, or materials to being able to cook food for a lot of people. We also got the Centro de Comunicación Estudiantil, which was the communications committee of the student movement. This is an example of some promo against the banks responsible of the debt. And this is like examples of what the base committees did in the day-to-day of the strike. This promotion here is like an example of the Grupo de Trabajo de Género, or the Puerto Móvil, that was the base committee of the student of the Women's and Gender Program of the University of Puerto Rico Rio Piedras campus. And this is, I wanted to put this in there because the feminist, women's, queer, LGBTQ teams were like something really important in our strike. these kind of themes and conversations were all over the place in the 2017 strike. So that was like a really good change and advance for the student movement in the university. And I want to make these are another examples of the things that we did in the day-to-day of the strike. But some things that are also important to explain is that no process is perfect, you know. I mentioned at the beginning that we didn't have in mind that the structures or in terms of organization or communication, but we did the best that we can with what we got. And this is a result of what happened the year before, because in 2016 the student movement proposed this strike and the student assembly reject to have this strike in that year. So we walk out that academic year, like, you know, in a not in a bad mood, but in a reflective mood, I would say, like, you know, what are we going to do? What is the best that we can do right now to you know, make ourselves stronger and to have this strike in the future. And then that was in 2016. In January 2017, when the fiscal board and the governor, they were talking in the press that they were going to make the $1 million cuts to the budget of the University of Puerto Rico. We decided that that wasn't a decision, that it was like, you know, everyone assumed that we were going on strike. The discussions were around when exactly, you know, the day to begin the strike, or what are going to be the main claims of this strike. And so the strike wasn't a discussion in that moment. And to finish, I wanted to say that the most important thing of the 2017 strike and the student movement from 2012, 13 to 2018, I would say, is that a small group, as Gabriel said, with clear ideas or like clear objectives. In our case, you know, we wanted the university to be public and to assure that the tuition wasn't, you know, higher for the next generation. Well, that were all our clear objectives and claims, and we did great things with that. Maybe we weren't the best at organization, and we did probably we were capable of doing some things better, but we did great things with what we got. That's the central part of this. And the 2017 strike got a really big impact in what it's happening in Puerto Rico until today. And most important, in May the 1st, 2017, we also got May the 1st in 2018 and the summer 2019, which led to the quitting of Ricardo Rosselló as a governor. So I will keep until that. So I think Gabriel Casal is the next. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Vero. If you want, you can stop sharing your screen so I can share this one. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. Well, my name is Gabriel Casal, as I told you. I'll be talking about communications, and for me, communications are talking about communication is very important because it's very tied to what activists want as what are our organizational goals, or what are we aiming for. And as the movement changed and evolved, well, our communicational strategies, outlook, and tools we used evolved as well. That first, I arrived at the university 2014, 2015, and I joined the student movement immediately, and I quickly became part of the communications team. Initially, in those stages, one of our goals was to consolidate a group that was capable of instigating and directing or mobilizing or generating a student movement. Initially, we were two groups: organization and communications. So our goals as communications was to create that stable and consistent group of people. But as the movement grew, and we started not only, and our goals changed, we no longer needed to just consolidate our group, but we had to get our message across to a wider audience. Well, then our communication strategy also had to become more complex and grow. I think, in a sense, how that communications group changed from year to year, it evolved with the movement. And what was interesting was that that as people joined the group, even though it wasn't the same group, it might have been a communications group of different groups every year, we still knew each other, and we still worked similar themes. So as we went up to, when we got to 2017, during 2016 we created, or we started using a page called Centro de Comunicación Estudiantil. I want to give a shout out to Carlos Mario, which is a great friend and was part of that team. I know he's listening right now. And that introduces to a Center for Student Communications. So by the strike, we had assumed a lot of responsibilities in the movement. It was not only talking to a consolidated group of activists, it was talking to a whole campus, a lot of colleges inside that campus. It was communicating also with a wider audience in other campuses across the island. And also we had to talk to a whole country, because at the end of the day, our objectives in the strike were national themes. During the strike, we were organized. We were divided in 4 groups. As an example, during the strike, we produced this type of image every day, this type of promotion. This included all the events that we had daily. So we would publish this one day before. And we had 4 groups, as I was saying. We had an internal messaging committee. So this group was in charge of contacting every base committee, asking what their activities was for the next day, joining them and making this like global event or global promotion. We were in charge of digitalizing contacts we received during assemblies and through our social media. And was in charge of communications, or tried to help with communications in between base committees and inside the student movement. Another team we had was audiovisual team. So they were in charge of all the audiovisual content in our social media. From videos, we did short documentaries. We did short documentaries in which we produced the music in the short documentaries. We did different lives. We had live shows. We had live transmissions of discussions like the ones we're having here. We had a wider range of activities that group did. We also had an investigations team. The investigations team was very important for us, so we could be able to delimitate what were our objectives. We, during the student strike, the Center for Student Communication, we had a large group meeting where we established what our campaigns were. We always had at least 2 campaigns active during the whole 73-day strike. One was against, since our main objective in the strike was to stop the budget cuts, the $300 million budget cuts, which represented, I think it was close to 1/3 of the state budget. Well, we knew that that was a national theme. We couldn't eliminate that cut without pressuring the Fiscal Control Board, without pressuring the governor, without pressuring the legislature. So we knew that since that was our goal, we had to transmit a national pressure to make sure that would happen. So we would do these investigations about how we accrued so much public debt, who was responsible for that public debt, who had enriched themselves at the cost of budget cuts and austerity through that debt, in order to implicate those that were actually responsible for that massive indebtedness, and by extension the budget cuts. So that investigations team was very important. We also had a team that would help the speakers or the national. We had a committee that were in charge of speaking to the press. They were our speakers that we had chosen inside our assemblies. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the narrative and how we decided and how that narrative was changed through the years. So initially, when I got to the movement, there had already been some years of budget cuts to the university. When we first got there, in order to consolidate a good group of people that were willing to work and develop a budding student movement, we had to communicate and construct this narrative that our conditions that were worsening as students were directly related to the money that the university had stopped receiving. So only by constructing that narrative were we able to mobilize students in order to act and in order to justify the need we had for a wider student movement. As time went by, the budget crisis in Puerto Rico worsened, the debt crisis worsened, and so did austerity. When they imposed the Fiscal Control Board, or when they were merely talking about the Fiscal Control Board, we had already been years developing the narrative that our education was worsening as a direct result of the worsening conditions of the island. And it was a very easy parallel to draw because our conditions as youth were getting worse and worse every day. As you might know, Puerto Rico lost 11% of its population in the past 10 years. And that's been due to a massive economic depression that we've suffered in Puerto Rico since 2005. And those conditions, as we constructed that narrative, it was very easy for the youth not only to see the situation in the country projected itself onto the university, not only as students, but as youth. So when they imposed the Fiscal Control Board, it was very easy to continue drawing that narrative in order to say that in order to rescue the university, we had to stop not only the Fiscal Control Board, not only the budget cuts, but the Fiscal Control Board in general, which was a very ambitious and if something I think there's to admire about the student movement in 2017 was how ambitious it was, definitely, because when it was the first movement, the Fiscal Control Board gets approved in June 2016. In November 2016, we have elections and a pro-fiscal control board governor wins. In January 2017, the fiscal control board starts operating, and immediately in January, the fiscal control board says that the first budget cuts are going to go towards the University of Puerto Rico, and it's going to receive 1/3 of its. It's going to reduce our budget by 1/3, and the student movement was ambitious in saying that not only do we have to save the university, but we have to challenge this fiscal control board, which in other words is a federal dictatorship. And I think that was a key point that was very, very well understood in the student movement, how undemocratic and colonial this fiscal control board was. So when that moment arrived, it forced organically the narrative towards us promoting a student strike in order to stop those budget cuts against the fiscal control board. And that implicated that our communication, at a communication standpoint, our objectives and our machinery has had to be really complex, because we had to keep our communications internally at a healthy amount, so we could talk about what were our objectives and how are we gonna do the strike. We had to at a wider level. We had to talk also to other. We had to communicate with other student campuses that were also on strike. At a wider level, we had to talk to the whole country, because in order to stop the strikes and to pressure the fiscal control board, we had to convince the country to come protest with us against this colonial imposition. So in a way, it was very ambitious, and it was very demanding of us as a communications team. But since we had developed and we had grown those years from 2015, 2016, 2017, then we were somehow in a way unknowingly, in a way, preparing ourselves for that moment. Let me see if I'm missing something else. These are some photos of some strikes or plenos. We would usually 2016, 2017 do these walkouts, and we would march around campus chanting and with music, inviting people to join. This was one of the barricades of the main gate. So I don't know if someone explained it, but we were the Rio Piedras campus is a big square, and in this strike particularly, we would organize ourselves around the gates to prevent police from potentially coming in. So that's why each gate had a base committee, and this was in place. If police were gonna try to get in, well, we're gonna make sure they couldn't, or they wouldn't. This is also, I think this is the front gate also as well. This is one of the organizations and one of the activities, one of the protests. This was one of the marches we did to a fiscal control board meeting. This was one of the first ones. So we would constantly, they would have these meetings in like convention centers, and we would nationally as a student movement go and protest there. I think this is a photo of the student assembly, or an assembly of Rio Piedras. That student assembly. In the video it said 10,000, but I had heard that they might have been as much as 13,000 students, which is unparalleled in Puerto Rico, at least. I cried a lot during that video because it was just such a beautiful day. We would also do, since we would, and I think something I'm missing that's very important is that the fiscal control board, the members were a few of them, 3 or 4 of them, were also were mainly bankers, and not only were they bankers, but they were bankers for the private sector. But for one point in their careers, they were the head bankers of Puerto Rico's national bank, or Puerto Rico's treasury. And as in charge of Puerto Rico's treasury, they were the ones who would sign off on the debt. So they were, and that this was important because this fiscal control board, which was full of members that had been responsible for the indebtedness of Puerto Rico, were the same ones that were saying that because of such large debt, we had to do budget cuts. And we thought it was very hypocritical that the same people that ruined us as a country are the ones that are asking us to give in everything we had, every public service we had, in order to pay back the debt that they did. So a lot of the activities we did was we would go to banks, particularly Banco Santander, which was a bank that one of the fiscal control board members presided over for years, and enriched himself for years. And we would denounce what role they had in generating our debt as a country. And I'm finishing now. This was all very important day, 1st of May 2017. The largest manifestation, or the largest protest Puerto Rico had seen since Vieques in 1999. More than 100,000 people went out to the streets, and the largest contingency obviously came from the University of Puerto Rico. This photo definitely doesn't do it justice. This was in the early mornings, in front of the university. It got to be even bigger than that. We did a lot of protests to mainly communicate our goals and what we wanted as a country. This is since it's such a dense topic, talking about debt, talking about austerity, talking about all these type of things. We created a dictionary called I don't know if it's strike dictionary or protest dictionary, and they're terms to topple a dictatorship. So we could basically digest a little bit of a lot of the terms we were comparing. This is one, and I'm finishing now. I think I've said that a few times, but this is one of the pamphlets we shared. It's called Mafia, Theft, and Dictatorship: the story of how a band of bankers orchestrated the theft of billions of our country's money. And it was presented by Student Communication Center. And these two persons, Carlos Garcia and Jose Ramon Gonzalez, were the main actors. And they were the fiscal control. There are two fiscal control members. Actually, none of the two are now presently part of the fiscal control board members. Are presently fiscal control board members, and I think in part is how we worked so much against them and threw them under the spotlight for being such corrupt politicians. I think this was our last pamphlet. During every assembly, we would prepare a pamphlet. It's the Great Strike of 2017. That's how we humbly called our strike. And it was I think that this last pamphlet was a timeline of what occurred during that strike. And I think that's it. I'm sure I went over the time I had been allotted to, but thank you. I hope, I know I missed some things, but I hope we could touch them again soon.
Okay, so I should just start. Okay, so hi, my name's Gabriel. Like I said, this is my first time sharing screen, so I'm doing my best. You guys can see the screen, right? Okay, so I'm supposed to talk about student power and negotiations. Carla said before, relationships with other sectors, but I would like how we've talked a lot about here. I think that goes into the term power and student power because of what Gabriel was just mentioning. We had to generate a lot of power, so building relationships and alliances with other organizations and sectors was a critical part of the student movement, and building our power. So what does student power look like? For us, obviously, this is just a product of our discussions of around 5 people, 4 people. In the student movement participated thousands and thousands of students. And I think I have to mention that before we continue, because we're just talking from one perspective. We're talking about the Rio Piedra campus. It was the most important one, in my opinion, but it wasn't the only one, and it didn't function on its own. And that's important to mention, because along with everything that we are saying, you have to multiply that by 11 campuses, just to start getting a little bit of a picture of what we're talking about. Okay, so what? And yeah, I'm sorry about the misspellings also. It's been a long time from when I've written in English. So organization. So how did organization look like? So how did student power look like? Well, I think it looks, it takes like 4 ways. Organizations, how you're organized, how strong your base committees are, how long you've been doing grassroots work, with what sectors you've been doing grassroots works inside the university, outside the university, or whatever sector you're in. The mass participation and discussions and decision making. I think that's also an important part of organization, the capacity to communicate those ideas, and to also building instruments to voice students' opinions, but also with the capacity to act upon those opinions. I think it's important to mention that, because I think that's where we stop being only places with opinions and start doing a little bit of more of political work when we start acting upon what we've discussed. Well, the alliances, we thought of the alliances that we needed to create student power. Not only was inside the university, I think here, not only the base committees is important to mention, and in maintaining an organized student body, or making the student body or the student strikers as diverse as possible. I think that something that Veronica mentioned earlier about the different themes that we've already always talk about, gender themes, the theme about thinking of our struggle as a youth struggle, not only a student struggle. All of that, basically was materialized by forums, discussions, small picket lines in front of the university, movie forums, every single night, every single day. We're talking about 15 activities in a single day for a student body for the UPR campus alone. So that had a lot to do in the whole ideological work that happened, and to make that base as diverse and ample as possible. Amplio, I don't know how to translate that. But as big as possible, that base, make it as big as possible. And to integrate, more and more people. We did this thing at the beginning of the strike that we called Days for the Family, Dia Familiare. When we played baseball, we played different games, family came, it wasn't only militancy and education, we also had that sort of spaces, and opened those sort of spaces to basically keep uniting and keep integrating more people, because again, for us, more people meant more power. The other part that I think is important to mention is the part of legitimacy. I think Gabriel mentioned it a little bit earlier, and like mentioned it a little bit like over the top. And when he was mentioning, no, Carla mentioned it earlier when she was explaining the difference between our university and maybe the organization camp in your realities. We in Puerto Rico and the University of Puerto Rico have the Consejo General de Estudiantes, and that's basically what the university administration recognizes as official representatives of the student body. Now, that legitimacy is basically also given in more in a cultural sense by the assemblies. Okay, so when a strike, generally when a strike is initiated, since the strike is initiated by the assembly, the student movement then takes a more legitimate role in the view of power, in the eye of power. And I think that's important to note, because when you do a strike, who do you in our reality, a legitimate question is, who do you negotiate with? Okay, because it's so big, the amount of people that are participating in the student movement, and it's so small the amount of organizations that are part of it, that that question always comes to mind. And so the student organization, as an autonomous center, basically, needs to gain this legitimacy, and it gains its legitimacy by abiding by the student demands, creating the conditions for student demands to rise and to make in cohesive terms to be able to be communicated, and also, well, by mobilization. If we can mobilize a lot of people, then you have to look at it. Something that I didn't mention earlier, but Gabriela was also mentioning it, is that we were facing a big problem, which was the fiscal board, bankers, not only the central government of Puerto Rico. Forget about the university government, not only the central government of Puerto Rico, but we were facing the fiscal board and bankers. And behind the fiscal board, what's behind the fiscal board is actually the Congress of the United States. So that's the power mapping that we had to do, and to basically confront that, we had to build a lot of power. So we from the get-go always had in mind that we had to mobilize what we call the people. That ambiguous term that it's more than the unions combined, but it's difficult to pinpoint, and it doesn't come up all the time. And that thing is, how do we mobilize the people, which we had to mobilize, was always a question that we had in mind, and we were always trying to answer, and we were always looking for ways to mobilize the people. So ni buitre ni corrupto, identifying the enemy. Like Gabriel said, I'm not going to mention a lot over here. We were facing big demands, and the demands were basically represented by these different powers, which were, as you can see, not limited to the university campus or the university administration, and not limited to the legislative branch or the executive branch of the local government. And that was important, because, like our other compañeros said, we basically built upon this from 2014. From 2014, the student movement was basically discussing, how the debt was related to the detrimental conditions of the university. So from the get-go, when the university strike started, we always knew that we had to take the strike from inside the campus to outside the campus, basically to be able to actually have a strike that was effective, because why do you strike for? Okay. So why we strike? I think Veronica, before Gabriel mentioned a consigna, a phrase that we used a lot, cerrar para abrir, cerrar para construir. We close to open, we close to build. And that was basically, I would say, the term that allowed for student power to be able to maintain and be reproduced in that in between before in 2011 and 2017. The small student strike, the small student walkouts were the ways that students without organizations or formal organizations could have the culture of organization and start to recognize the power that they have when they organize and they mobilize, through a consistent amount of time. And in 2017, we stroked in more practical terms because we needed to stop the normality of the university. We needed to stop the classes to be able to move the students from inside the campuses to the street, so we could be able to mobilize the people, and we could impact the people that we needed to impact for our demands to be met. And that's why, we needed to strike, and that's why we needed to strike at the moment that we needed to strike. Another factor was that in that moment, and this is important because, the correlations of power, the university administration at that time was in a transition. So the people that were in office, in the highest, in the Junta de Gobierno, the government committee, was basically there with a certain amount of time, before the government that was coming in, which was Ricardo Rosillo's government, would change the directors. So we know that meant there was a crack. Okay, that meant that there was a space there that could be attacked and could be exploited, because they weren't a united body. Okay, they had conflicts between them. So that was an important reason why we needed to strike in that moment. The government wasn't established. The elections were in 2016. The strike, kind of already started between February and March. We needed to strike to mobilize the people, and we needed to create the pressure, which we created it by stopping the school semester and not permitting it to end nor to begin until our conditions, or the condition, the student conditions, were met, which, like before has been said, was to audit the debt, to make illegal what was, and to discard what was illegal of the debt, to discard the fiscal plan that the Fiscal Control Board gave the university to do, and to not permit the tuition hike. That was a hike from $55 a credit to $130 a credit in a matter of a semester. It's the highest tuition hike that has ever seen in the University of Puerto Rico. That was proposed for that semester. And to give a little context, this is February, okay? In September, Maria passed through Puerto Rico, okay? So we're talking about in that time frame, all right? And I'm not gonna go, a lot through all of this, just to give you an idea about the way that we build power. We had mobilizations, we had assemblies, and then we had mobilizations, and we had assemblies, and we had small strikes. And I would say it was like that until March 28th, which was the day that Rio Piedras began the strike. And it's important that I mention that other campuses had strikes from the end of 2016 to the beginning of 2017. Okay, so Rio Piedras wasn't the first campus to strike, and that's important because it gave Rio Piedras confidence. You know, it gave a student movement that had been that a proposal had been voted against, you know, a year before, to have more confidence to you know, begin a strike and to propose that in March 2001. I would like to mention real quick here for you guys to see that, you know, between February in the second month of the year, we had a really active month, you know, and this is beginning the student strike. We already had faculty assemblies. We had in a general assembly with 33% of the student of the active student body. We had one of the biggest marches that we had until that moment, from Capitolio to Fortaleza. So we were getting a taste of the power that we had and the support that we had outside the University of Puerto Rico. What Veronica mentioned, which was the women's strike. We did activities inside the university and outside the university, and it's important to mention that this is the first week after, second week, 2 weeks after a really big march. Okay, so we feel a momentum here. Okay, and we also start getting, or a lot of people start getting different types of experiences. Not only do they participate in a lot of assemblies, we also have a lot of plenos, you know, the small reunions inside the university, a lot of reunions inside the faculties, and we had stoppages, blockages. You know, we participated, the students participated in a blockage in March 8th of 2017. So you have coming into the March 21st, a student body that has all of this diverse experiences that has basically accumulated in a small amount of time. Okay, and March 28th is when the strike in the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras began. We gave the university 1 week after the assembly in March 21st. We began the strike in March 28th, and then the strike. The strike became an indefinite strike that united with the rest of the university campuses on April 5th. Okay, but we already had voted that we were going to continue to a strike. So the intention was, to some extent, to get into this National Assembly with a certain amount of organization, with a certain amount of clarity of our ideas, of the proposals that we were going to take, with a certain amount of clarity also with the strategy that we were also going to implement in the strike that we had against huge monsters. And you know, April 5th is the assembly that you guys saw at the beginning of the forum. And real quick, I'm just going to mention March 31st, because this day is an example of the type of activities that we continue on doing for the rest of the strike. This basically sums up the type of strategy and tactics that we implemented to pressure our enemies and to denounce. Okay, you know, denounce, march, and occupy. In March 31st, students and the Jornadas Acabaron las Promesas, which was the organization that Carla talked about of 2016, that started around when the Junta Control Fiscal was named. Like a group between them and the student movement occupied the offices of Carlos Garcia in the early morning. There was around 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, and you can see the photo there of the people with the shields and stuff like that. They occupied that office for about 2 to 3 hours. The day that the Fiscal Control Board was gonna have its 6th reunion in the Centro Convenciones. In the afternoon of that day, the students marched with a lot of people from the university, you know, APU, which was the teachers union, Hermandad Empleada de Exentos No Docentes, which is the union for the members of the university that are non-faculty. And there was also a union of truckers that came with us and marched with us that day. And in the afternoon, we did the first People's Mic, which was an activity that we did when we entered Santander or Banco Popular, basically banks, and we read in People's Mic fashion a statement, basically denouncing who were the people responsible for the debts of Puerto Rico and how that bank in particular was related to the debt. You can see types of photos that we pasted in the bank's walls and stuff like that. We also talked to the people that was in the banks, and it was really a good activity, or a good combination of activities to integrate different people and to build power in different stages. You had mass mobilizations, you had individual strikes that and direct actions that impacted people in power and people that were directly related to our demands. And yeah, the purpose was to create a crisis, and that was all in one day. Okay, to give you an idea of what we did, in one day, and the relationships that we build with other organizations to be able to do that type of activities. This is what I was basically talking about right now. So we had to unite actions, the narrative, and the demands that we had from the student body. So we had to if our demand was against the public debt, against the public cuts, the tuition hikes, and stuff like that, and the narrative was against the general discussion against the fiscal board's intentions and the government's intentions to orient the education in Puerto Rico to a debt-oriented education. Okay, the purpose of this whole process is basically to create a university where the students are in debt, like in the universities in the United States. I don't have the quote right now, but reading up when I was preparing for the forum, Jose Carrion, which was the president of the Fiscal Control Board, said that students in the U.S. perfectly study in debt, and that's not a problem for studying in the U.S. And that's basically the orientations that was behind or is still behind the fiscal board, the Fiscal Control Board, and the process of austerity against the university. And our actions were basically to denounce, to pressure, and to mobilize. Pressure, doing those actions in particular, but also generating mass opposition to the plan that I just explained, which was basically giving up the essential services of Puerto Rico for the paying of the public debt. And that was basically what we were trying to do. We were trying to make that our actions combined with the demands and the narrative, and that each action basically explains on its own. The photo in the middle, for example, is an action that we did on 20th of April, that we paralyzed, we blocked the offices of the Fiscal Control Board and their lawyers, which were the offices next to them. And then that day, we basically during the blockage, we were talking in the press about the relationships between them, the Fiscal Control Board, and the public debt. Over here on the left, you can kind of see, like a printed flyer of, the direct relationships between those banks and our debt. next to that, you can at the end you can see a photo of a day, the 2nd of January. We called it the day against the National Day Against the Banks. And we called for a boycott. People canceled their situation, their bank accounts and stuff like that. So the other part is basically creating mass mobilization. As you can see over here, that's a bird's eye view of the 1st of May. It's a better picture of what Gabriel showed you before. And also a photo of a concert that we have in the 9th of April. So this sort of activities helped us to engage with a broader audience, broader amounts of people, and to demonstrate to the government, the local government, and also the Fiscal Control Board that we had a mass support for our demands. Okay, and that is important because what we were basically saying to the people and the government was that we knew that what we were talking about, that they were wrong. That wasn't the way that they had to do with the university, and for a better university, more accessible and public, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we needed to go to another way. We couldn't keep divesting funds from the university. We had to invest. So we did a lot of press conference mentioning that. We did a lot of marches. People came to university with food and stuff like that. And we at a certain moment to prove that point, we put in a five project bill of different ways to find $500 million to deal with the university and to avoid the budget cuts. And one of the ways that one of the proposals that we had in our bill was, which is important because in the recent months we've had a lot of news about a lot of people coming down to Puerto Rico for Law 20, Law 22, and because of it is a fiscal paradise for individuals, for millionaires, and that's been like that since 2012. We gave in one of the proposals was to have a tax on luxury, on second houses of $600,000 or more, yachts of certain amounts of money, stuff like that, to kind of point to the people that they were creating the country for. And it's important because in recent days, like Gabriel mentioned, since 2000, around 13% of Puerto Ricans have left the island, and from 2016, a lot of millionaires have been coming to the island. So much so that luxury homes in certain parts of Puerto Rico have been bought out. And they've been having to move to other places. So I'm mentioning that because it's an important part of what we did, and the process of building power, because we were talking about the country. We didn't want necessarily for the people to assume the demands of the university. We wanted the people to assume the demands of the nation, okay, in a certain sense. The university was a way to that. So the 1st of May was an expression of that, power of that alliances that we built inside and outside the university with different syndicates. And it's important to mention that the alliances that we built was with syndicates and unions that we thought were more inclined to mobilize, okay? Not to just sit around and discuss unifying programs and stuff like that, no. That were more inclined to create mobilization and, to create different conditions in the country and, in the moment. For that, we had discussions with with the electricity unions, the aqueduct union, different university unions, and yeah, you know, a lot of different people. But also to be able to call for that national strike the 1st of May, we had to call for the people. You know, we had to call for not just specifically for the syndicates. You know, so talking about the country, talking about for example the state of health in the country, you know, the state of different services in the country in general was an important part of the strike, to be able to basically you know, build that power. And in these big mobilizations, we showed that legitimacy that we had. And that's a really powerful thing when a student movement is able to call out a government, or is able to call out an instrument of Congress, okay? And is able to tell them that their public policy is wrong, and is able to tell them that their public policy is politically motivated because they do have an agenda, and that we have our other alternatives, and we have another type of an agenda, and that's important. And it's more important when it's legitimized by thousands and thousands of people in protests like the 1st of May.
Gabby, sorry.
Yeah.
Can you try and wrap up? Is that my biggest concern, Gabriel, is that maybe the Zoom might close at 8 time of Puerto Rico. So
yeah, I'm just gonna.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, pero continúa. Mala mía.
Yeah. So you know, those conditions were the way that we tried to build power. Negotiations were kind of you know, basically more in the media with those types of expressions than, you know, formal exchanging papers and discussing points, bullet points and stuff like that, of what generally a union is more accustomed to, or formal negotiations, you know, amount to. There was at the beginning, you know, a lot of saying, you meet with us, no, you meet with us, and stuff like that, and meetings being postponed and stuff like that. But what I really wanted to point out is that they always correspond to the moment that we had most activity in the streets. And you know, in the first few days of the strikes, we had meetings with the governor. It was only 30 minutes, but you know, it was the only meeting we got. We had mentions of the Fiscal Control Board to meet with the students, which was a way of recognizing the student as a power, you know, that I had to negotiate with. And before the strike began, the university spoke in favor of the debt audit, okay, which was something that we pushed to meet. But the real negotiations basically began around May 9th, when the university dean created a mesa de diálogo institucional, basically a place where we could, where different sectors of the university could basically negotiate and discuss the students' demands. And in May 20th, we had, you know, 11 days after that, the creation of that space, mesa, table, round table, we had our first accords. Those first accords were rejected that night in the different students' plenaries in the University of Puerto Rico, and you know, and the rest of the universities in campus in the island, and you know, that accord, which included not raising the tuition for a year, which was something that no student movement had ever reached before, was you know, fined and was in that pre-accords. It was in that accords. No reprimienda, sanctions. No sanctions to student strikers. and different and another small parts. But the important part here of those accords was the hike, was the prevention of the hike, and that was basically what we won out of the rest of the demands that we have of national debt, of auditing of the national debt, and stuff like that. We didn't win the stopping of the budget cuts. We won the stopping of the tuition hike, which was more than other student movements have reached in other moments. But it was much less than what a lot of people went to strike for. So that generated a lot of tensions. And nothing. I wasn't gonna go much more. Just gonna mention that to always plan for the unexpected, or embrace it, because something that we didn't see was that there was a lawsuit from students that demanded the opening of the university, but that lawsuit was directed against the president of the university. So the one who faced jail time, lawsuits, going to court, stuff like that, was the president herself. And it's really interesting to mention that because it was like a shot that went back and didn't turn out too well for them. Because if you notice, the day that we signed the accords, the 20th, is actually the day afterwards. After the court, the date that the court gave Nidia to open the university. Nidia Fernandez, which was the president of the university at that time, asked the 21st, asked actually before, but they answered the 21st to enter the police in the campus and to open the campus. But the government was so afraid of having a situation like the 2010-2011, where you had police moving around campuses, 15, 20 students arrested every day, a lot of conflict in the whole Rio Piedras area. Neither the junta, the governor junta, which controlled the university, wanted to be viewed like that. The dean didn't want to be viewed like that. And Nidia Fernandez didn't want to go to jail, in general terms. So that was like another pressure that was applied to the university, and that found, in my opinion, that it contributed to the accords, and that we didn't plan, but we took advantage of. And this is the general sum of it all. We did like 8 marches, 6 blockages, 2 concentrations, 9 assemblies, 2 occupations, and 7 people's mics and banks. In total, there were like 50 activities that we did in the whole student strike, without mentioning the forums, small pickets in front of the university, and a lot of stuff like that.
Gracias, Gaby. Thank you, everyone. This was amazing. Thank you so much for sticking with us up until the very end. Now we're going to finally open it up for questions. So Andrea is going to facilitate and help this part. You can either type your question on the chat in English or Spanish, or you can unmute yourself and say your question in English or Spanish. We will answer it in both languages or in Spanglish. So yes, Andrea, I'll leave it up to you. If you're still with us, unmute yourself, Andrea, and help us facilitate this part. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging in there.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Can you all hear me? I hope. Okay, yeah. Good. Sorry.
Sí, te escuchamos, Andrea.
So we had moderated questions, but we're going to skip those to get to you all's questions. So again, feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in, or put it in the chat.
Hi, I have a question. This is Lila chiming in. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier on. I'm in art history at UIUC and the GEO. And thank you guys so much for this. This is really, really a treat. And my question is about in all of the dialogues that you're having at all of these different scales, given that there's this kind of disaster capitalism narrative that that Puerto Rico seems to encounter, you know, when things enter the media and whatnot, but that there's really this financialization and that kind of capitalism undergirding all of this. I'm wondering, you know, strategies that you've had to navigate that dialogue, if that makes sense. Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure who to direct it to, I guess if anyone, but we can also shelve that for later. No, thanks again. Mil gracias.
So who wants to take the question?
Well, I think I can say something about that. Well, I feel like the financialization of our economy it worsened after Puerto Rico's previous model of economic development was phased out in 2005. It was until then we had depended a lot on like a more industrial, particularly pharmaceutical type of economic development. But as that was phased out in 2005, the government relied a lot on debt to maintain its expenditures and keep the economy artificially at flow. I think as time went on and the severity of that debt crisis worsened, the government's incapacity to pay off its debt implicated that Congress. It was in Congress and in Wall Street's best interest to impose that fiscal control board. So as a student movement, for us, it was very important to draw that line historically of how we got to be so indebted, which was precisely because we're not in control of our economic well-being or our economic mode of production, and precisely because of that colonial relationship we have with the United States, is that this financialization of our economy happens and was imposed on us. And I think that as a movement, we had to be very clear who was responsible for this dismantling of not only our education system, but our health system, our infrastructure, and our energy system. And one of the ways we did that was through those people's mics, was to punctualize and be very clear who and how was responsible for that indebtednent and how they had enriched themselves, and how absurdly the Congress had chosen those same people to impose these fiscal control measures. I don't know if I answered your question, but with this whole disaster capitalism aspect, well, I guess they're comorbid in a sense. I feel that precisely Puerto Rico's massive indebtedness has politically given the political weapons or tools to that ruling class for them to impose even more severe measures upon our economy and upon our society. So I think we can't separate those two models and yeah, I think that's it. I hope I answered some of your question, or part of it at least.
Awesome. Thank you, Lila. And I see Alessandra has a hand up, so feel free to unmute or ask your question in the chat.
Perfect. Hi, thank you. I know some of you, I presented myself in the chat. You know, I study. I studied the UPR student movement. Some of you might know my dissertation was on the previous strike on 2010, 2011. So that the link that I shared, that's why it's only included until 2009 in the background of this UPR student movement. So it definitely gives a lot more in-depth detail that Carla presented, which was, you know, again, you'll see some similar photos and similar information that she provided. But I had a question. I know every student movement has its own demand and its own different context. But I was remembering when I was following you guys in the strike, I was again in the diaspora. One of the things that struck out was there was a movement to reinvigorate Radio Huelga and certain tactics and strategies that have been used in previous strike, not just the 2010 and 2011. So part of my research is really looking at how there is this continuum between different tactics and strategies. So is there something that you guys remember particularly if you were aware that it came from previous strike? And if so, which one were they?
Okay. Hi. Gracias, Alessandra, for that question. I don't know what our otros compañeros can say, but I would say that, you know, first of all, from the 2010-2011 strike in particular, you know, the different committees, you know, more than mobilization, you know, the organizational factor, you know, we had it as a norm, okay, as something that was part of the process. And that we had to do. We didn't even think about it much. That the faculties needed to be organized, and those faculties organized were going to be the base of the movement. And that is important because I believe in 2010 that was a discussion. That wasn't necessarily a norm, and the comités de acción came after. In general, came after the assemblies. And not before, you know, and I think that was a discussion in 2010. Obviously, the part of you know, mobilization and, you know, and the strike as not only a form of power, of student power, and a way to mobilize our student power, but also the strike as a way to mobilize outside the university. I remember in 2011, I think 2010 also, I think this was also a discussion that in 2017, we had, you know, said that this wasn't going to be much of a discussion, is that we had to take the strike outside the university. And I would, and yeah, I would say that a lot of that correlations was more based on experiences that passed on through the strikes that we did between 2014 and 2017, rather than the political organizations. Because that was something different in 2010 that we didn't have in 2017. That there was much less political organizations involved in the organizative process. And with this, I'm going to stop. I think that one of the main things that we took from 2010, more unconsciously than consciously, was to identify the powerful, you know, that directly identify who you want to negotiate with. Don't stand by with anyone that comes to meet you. No. I want to meet the board of trustees, because those are the ones that make the decisions. I don't want to meet just the president or the dean. I want to meet the board of trustees. I want to meet the fiscal control board. Not because in 2010 they were talking about fiscal control boards, but because we knew that we had to sit with those in power, not necessarily those as representative, even though they represent also.
Thank you, everyone. I think we have less than a minute. Is this Carla, will the Zoom cut off?
I have no idea, but I think we may have time for a couple of, maybe one or two more questions. So yeah, feel free to ask questions or write them on the chat. Hopefully it won't kick us out at 7. But yeah.
Hi, I have a question. First of all, thank you so much for putting this together. It has been wonderful to hear about your strike organizing. I think I have a very boring organizer type of question. You mentioned that, you did a lot of mass mobilization and mass decision making. So what were the processes of your decision making? You mentioned the assembly, but also how did you deal with like differences in opinion? What sort of processes did you have in place? Whoever, any of you should jump in.
Vero, ¿quieres coger esa?
¿Me escuchan?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Yes. Voy a hablar en español porque es más fácil para mí. Y cualquiera de ustedes me va traduciendo. Aparte de la asamblea, we got la coordinadora. I don't know if you remember the structure that I present in my part. Well, that kind of meetings were sometimes more important than the assemblies because in our belief or political practice, we always were trying to get to the assembly with all the discussion or the most difficult part of the discussions or conversation or the more controversial topics, discussed. The assembly is not to have the conversation; it's just to take to make the decision or the final decision. So every small meeting or every pleno, which is what the name how we call the more big meetings between the base committees, were more important than the assembly. In the assembly, we just decide how when the strike is going to start, but we do not decide that we were going to have a strike in the assembly. We were very convinced in 2017 that we were going to be on a strike. And a part of that, I believe also in the day-to-day activities. Gabriel mentioned that we some days got like 15 activities in the different areas of the campus. So every single activity, regardless it was like a movie forum, a forum, a game, I don't know, whatever you can imagine, it's really important to, to move the conversation or to that para llegar mejor, to get better to the final decision. We got really difficult topics or discussions, and one of the best example I can give you is the one about the negotiation one. I don't know if Gaby si quiere hablar de eso, because we were almost there to have a negotiation or a legal negotiation with the administration of the university, but the Rio Piedras campus reject those negotiations. And that pleno and those meetings were like really warm up because we get really emotional in there. And so some topics we never, get to a happy medium. So I would say that more than the assemblies, the base committee meetings and the plenos.
I wanted to very quickly chime in and add, as Veronica was mentioning, And to give again a little bit of context, so the student assemblies is where thousands of students come in, and those are convocated by the official student council of the university, which is the official governance structure. And then we had our internal plenos, which is the meeting of the strikers on campus, which are typically 200 plus people. And one of the things that we discuss in our reflections, because we have been meeting for several months to prepare for this event and reflecting on our past experience, is, as Veronica was mentioning, there was maybe a lack of political discussion in each base committee. So in each of those committees that you saw that were in front of the gates that were separated by college, the people of performing arts, the people of education, that was my portón, my gate. We had, because we were maybe unexperienced, because a strike takes a lot of emotional taxation on you, we didn't necessarily discuss politically how our activities were connected to pressure for the specific demands and how we were going to prepare to transition out of the strike. And that meeting that Veronica made reference to, we had maybe the opportunity to sign very important pre-agreements with the university administration. And because, and I personally did that mistake too, because we were such in a high, doing more activities, going outside more, doing more mass activities, we were kind of like in a permanent strike state instead of understanding when was the moment to wrap up and then keep organizing in the country. Because again, we were one of the first sectors in the country that made so public, made so accessible the debt crisis of Puerto Rico. And the communications team that Casal was part of was very instrumental in explaining that, como decimos los boricuas, en arroz y habichuela, in very simple thoughts and ideas, how our material conditions in the university were totally connected to the situation in Puerto Rico, and how those people weren't indefenseless, weren't gods. We could actually change the narrative, as Gabby was saying, that these people had an agenda and we had the capacity to stop it. But yeah, hopefully those two comments, Roshni, answer your question.
Can I say something?
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. No, just to add, not only did we make it acceptable or a norm, the discussion of the public debt as a problem, but also we showed how the Fiscal Control Board, which I didn't mention it before, didn't come to Puerto Rico to put the politicians in line. Okay, because today we have it as like a normal narrative that the Fiscal Control Board is bad, but in 2017, when they were just starting, a lot of people in the general discussion, it wasn't that, it was the fiscal board came to Puerto Rico to basically put the politicians in line, to stop corruption, to put our fiscal economy, on track, and stuff like that. And students basically showed that not only they didn't come here to make better our economy or to make our social conditions better, or to help our finances or anything like that. Not only that they didn't come here for that, they came here to basically create pay a debt without without thinking of the cost of the social cost. And not only that, they didn't even know our reality. We had a meeting with them on the 25th of May, and 25th or 24th. And basically, one of the things that we asked them was textually that, have you done any studies on the social impacts and economical impacts of what you're going to do to university? Jose Carrion, with really, really calmly said, no, we haven't gotten into that. We haven't seen anything like that. So coming out of that meeting and telling Puerto Rico that what was going on and the reality was really important. And to pinpoint what Veronica was mentioning about the accords, and what Carla was mentioning about the accords. I'm not gonna get into it. It's just the importance of discussing in general the minimum. What you're not going, in process of the negotiations where you're not going below from. Okay, in 2010 it was la exenciones de matrícula, the extensions in tuition.
Tuition waivers.
Tuition waivers. In our reality was the hike. It's just that we didn't have a general discussion and general consensus of that in the whole student movement. And when those accords came in the 20th, the students rejected it. We went to assembly the 25th. And we voted to extend the strike until the Board of Trustees signed that agreement. But there wasn't any Board of Trustees because the 25th of May, all of them renounced to avoid calling the police, basically. So there was no head in the whole university administration until after our strike. Our strike in Rio Piedras ended the 5th of January, and the 5th of June. And the last university to leave the strike was Humacao, the 7th of June.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your answers. So I'm going to ask one last and overarching question. So, how was the student strike impactful for the rest of the nation, Puerto Rico, in the following years to come? So since then.
Well, I think along the lines a little bit of what Gabriel was saying about how it changed the perspective of what the Fiscal Control Board was actually here to do. I think it was very important. One, in a moment like the 1st of May 2017, we had created an environment and an ambient in the country where the 1st of May we generated a protest that the country hadn't seen in decades, against not only the budget cuts in the university but against austerity in general. And I think we started to get a ball rolling during those few years against not only the budget cuts in the university but against austerity in general. And I think it's very difficult to grasp or to concretely see how public opinion changes. But in one way, we could see it in elections. For example, in the elections in 2020, while you had in 2016 only one candidate opposing to work with the Fiscal Control Board, in elections in 2020, every single candidate said that they were going to, in one way or another, try to conflict the Fiscal Control Board. They weren't going to collaborate, including the governor, the PNP, which is the statehood party, had to change their discourse about how they perceive the Fiscal Control Board. And I think not only the student movement, but other movements against austerity in general, we started to get the ball rolling on not only what the public perception should be about the Fiscal Control Board, but how to face it and what attitude to have against the Fiscal Control Board. Because I think something, and I mentioned it in my turn earlier, that the student movement was particularly ambitious in not only in what our demands were, but how were we going to get them. We had been going through years of Puerto Rico's left using some tactics that weren't as confrontational, that were more or the union movement being more ready to cede or negotiate with with the government or with with corporations without necessarily going through that confrontation that is precisely what calls in people that you want to unify in your struggle. I think it was very important, and I can with confidence say that if we hadn't done that student strike in 2017, the movement of the summer of 2019 to eradicate Ricardo Rosselló wouldn't have happened, and I say that with total confidence because I think it was a key moment against not only the Fiscal Control Board and austerity, but against colonialism in general. We could very easily draw the line on how austerity and neoliberalism in Puerto Rico isn't going to benefit us. It's the same formula that's been tried and failed for the past 20, 30 years. And there's only one way to combat that, which is through confrontative manifestations in the streets with the people, without necessarily ceding to the institutions only when we have a lot out of it to gain. I don't know if any of my comrades would want to add to that.
Yes, I want to add that for me the biggest or the main, ¿cómo se dice logro? Achievement accomplishment of the 2016 and student movement and the strike was how we were capable of explain in a really simple way, as Carla was mentioning before, the debt, because many Puerto Ricans, as myself, we were always in debt. Since I was born, my dad is in debt, my mom is in debt, you know, and all my life has been around the debt. I am very afraid of the debt. So it was really important for me being part of the student movement of those years, because I also have the opportunity to understand and explain the debt in other terms. You know, many people are really afraid of talking about debt because it's like this big and abstract thing, and we are like really afraid of. But the 2017 student strike made that really easier for a lot of people. Like my mom understood the debt in more easier words and forms. So I would say that that was the biggest achievement. And also that, I don't know, we were really militant and we did really confrontative actions. I was part of the students that believed that we should be every single day of the strike doing that kind of actions. I would love to see more of that, regardless of the consequences, because as Gabriel was saying, the tables and dialogues or possibility of negotiating were always on time with those kinds of actions. And during the summer 2019, this thing about the la capucha, ¿cómo se dice capucha?
No sé cómo decirle.
The mask, you know, the face mask to protect your identity. That was a discussion after the 1st of May of 2017, and a lot of groups, syndicates and political organizations, you know, like they took distance from that kind of actions from some of the students. But on the summer 2019, it was like a rule or normal to go to the Old San Juan with the mask to protect your identity, because we know that the government, they follow you, they charge you with criminal charges. So those kinds of things were really important. And Carla, probably you're going to talk about that. But after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, there were like these community organized groups, and some of the young people that participated in the strikes had the herramientas, se me fue esa palabra, the tools to be part or apport to those organized groups to to respond to the necessities to after the Hurricane Maria. So it's like a lot of things, but I would say that those are the most important to me.
I would also quickly add just a learning experience overall. I mean, in my personal case, as a member of the GEO, like I've been able to coordinate a committee here that has been going into the budgeting and finances of the university. And I wouldn't have that experience if I wouldn't come from the student movement in Puerto Rico. And I think one of the biggest learnings, like in addition to everything, obviously I agree with what Casal said, what Veronica said, what Gaby said, is how can we keep political discussions in our institutions and our organizations? Like I typically get some pushback sometimes in my union or in some spaces here in the US, when I say we need to have a political discussion, we need to understand the material conditions, we need to understand what is the plan of the dominant class, because we literally did that in the student movement. We went over the news, we studied the budgets, we studied the documents, we studied the reports, and we were a very small group at the beginning. Like our organization had like 10, 15 people. The people that continued before the 2017 strike started were a little bit over 150 plus people. You don't need a gigantic group of people to actually start a movement. You just need very good consistency and political clarity to understand what to do, when to do it, and what is the ultimate goal. And I think that just to conclude, because we in Puerto Rico, since we have been experiencing so many climate disasters over the last years, right? We saw the hurricanes, then before the pandemic, we had earthquakes, now the pandemic. It is coming to be a necessity to start having hard and difficult conversations in organizations, because we need to go back not to a normal, but to more radicality, to identify more the root causes of our problem, so that when we bargain with administrations, when we negotiate with these institutions, we have a solid project and ultimate goal that goes beyond what we're expected to do under capitalism. And I think even though that could have been a weakness, I think that accomplishment of very much understanding how the national is connected to the local augmented the experience of all of us in the strike and made us very good leaders and also affectionate leaders with what we were supposed to do. No sé si alguien más quiere decir algo. We apologize, we've been completely over time, but we're wrapping up. I don't know si Gaby or anyone else wants to say some final words before we close, or if there's any other questions from the audience.
Creo que debemos hablar un poco del caso.
I wanted to mention, sorry, Casal, something. I don't remember if we mentioned that the women's strike was
in the beginning
by la colectiva feminista en construcción.
Sí.
Sí, no lo recordaba. And also Alessandra, I think asked something about the strategies that have been consistent during the time, or different things. And I don't remember that any of you mentioned the Centro de Comunicación Estudiantil. De centro, ¿lo mencionaron?
No, pero continúa, perdón.
El Centro de Comunicación Estudiantil, I don't know, I think it was created during the 2010 or 2011 strikes. And then in 2016 and during the 2017 strike, it was really important. But also I wanted to mention that aquí me van a tener que traducir, esto no me va a salir en inglés, que a pesar de que han habido cosas consistentes a través del tiempo y en distintos contextos del movimiento estudiantil, ha habido una falta de comunicación consistente a la misma vez por la falta de documentación y de que esa documentación sea pública y estudiada más allá de los momentos en los que hay procesos como huelga o paro. Entonces,
Pero,
pues...
Puedes pararlo ahí para yo traducir esa parte. So Vero is saying that in addition, even though the student movement has continued throughout the strike, and there has been a consistency of movements throughout the University of Puerto Rico, Veronica is mentioning that one big limitation is the lack of documentation and study around what was happening during the student movement. Continúa, Vero.
Nada, que si fuera como algo más, pues que si se accesible o se divulgara mucho más, pues muchas otras estrategias o cuerpos que se han creado y demás podrían ser, ¿verdad?, más consistentes durante el tiempo, y es algo que hemos hablado igual. Y por eso, pues, este tipo de espacio también es importante.
And Veronica is mentioning that if this type of documentation of skills and learning experiences were more accessible to the student movement, maybe there would be even more continuity, and that's why this space that we're doing here today is so important. If there aren't any other questions or comments, we want to thank you so very much for sticking with us until the end. Gracias a todo el mundo que nos está escuchando en español y que ha estado aquí desde Puerto Rico y otro espacio. We will make the recording available to all of you. And as Casal also mentioned, as you know, we also did this event as a fundraiser. We're going to send you again via email the PayPal and the Venmo so you can make your donations. And yeah, solidarity. Thank you so much. Ni pagüites ni corrupto, l'UPR nuestro punto.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Maureen.
Great job. Wonderful, wonderful.
Gracias. Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Laila.